Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for another research interview. Today, I'm very glad to be joined by Dr. Mark Ettenberger, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark to tell us a little bit about himself.
Thank you, Amy, for this invitation. My name is Mark Ettenberger. I'm a music therapist originally from Austria. I live and work now for 10 years in Bogota, the capital of Colombia. And here I'm the director of Sono, a music therapy center. I'm a lecturer at the Masters in Music Therapy at the National University of Colombia. And I coordinate the music therapy services in 3 hospitals here in Colombia. So thank you again for this invitation. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. It's wonderful to have you joining us from Colombia today. So could you please tell us a little bit about your research experience and what projects you have done?
Yes. So we've been involved mainly in research projects in the neonatal intensive care unit, mostly thinking about how families can actively participate in the research studies and in music therapy sessions. And lately we've been also engaged in research projects in the adults intensive care unit, specifically with burn patients and with ventilated patients. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the research designs of those studies and what you were specifically looking at.
Yes. So in the neonatal intensive care unit, these are mostly mixed methods studies. We've always tried to find a balance between making results visible and quantifiable also, especially it's an intensive care unit context, medical staff, the hospitals usually they're very keen to have hard data, but they're also aware that music therapy often impacts families and patients in a more subtle way that is more difficult to grasp with numbers. So they're also very open to qualitative bits of the research where we did interviews or questionnaires, like to get an idea about the lived experience of the patients during music therapy.
Tell us a little bit also about the burn study and the research design.
Yes, yeah. So actually we started recruiting just 2 weeks ago. So we have now 3 participants involved. It will be 72 in total. And this is a study looking specifically at background pain for burn patients, not at procedural pain, but we are also looking at anxiety, depression, and we are also, this is a collaboration with the Department of Biomedical Engineering of the University of Los Andes, where we also, with some patients, will do electroencephalography, electromyography, and electrocardiography. So it's a mix of psychological outcomes and biological outcomes, but focusing mainly on pain, and this a randomized clinical trial.
There are so many research methods to pick from when designing a study. Do you have any favorites or ones that you tend to use more often? Yeah,
well, usually we're trying a lot to implement mixed methods research, because we know that obviously, well, numbers and hard data are very important, but since the research projects are implemented in a clinical service, so we're not just doing research, actually we're doing a lot of clinical work. So we know, and the hospitals know, and the medical staff knows that there's so many aspects that you cannot grasp with a number or with a chart. So we really also try to do qualitative bits of the research. So mixed methods, I would say, is the preferred option, which we have implemented in nearly all the studies. With the burn, the burn patients, it's just quantitative at the moment, but usually we try to go for mixed methods, but it's a lot of work.
I think,
as you know.
Well, actually, I very much use mixed methods for many of my studies. I find that yes, that there can be that balance of having some of the quantitative, harder number data, and also it gets to more of the heart of music therapy, the qualitative.
Totally.
How would you say your research compares to other projects you know about anywhere in the globe?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the research we've done in the neonatal intensive care unit, I think they are very much family-centered. And I think that has become really a topic within the field of NICU music therapy, not just to think about the babies and the development of the babies themselves, but also understand them within the context of a family system. And I think this is something that has been resonating very much in the field. We've also actively worked with fathers in the studies. And I think this is still a topic maybe that there is a lot of potential to explore more about how fathers also can be involved in research study and how they can benefit from music therapy. But it will depend on the unit itself, on the visiting policies. It will depend on the wider healthcare policies of each country. You know, paternity leave, maternity leave. There are many countries that may be more restricted in this sense. So Colombia is still a collective society, so family presence is high in the hospitals, and this favors obviously and influences also the way we work and do research here.
Are there any music therapists or researchers that have inspired your work, or that you've looked to their research?
Yeah, I think many. There is, I mean, in the field of neonatal intensive care and neonatology, there's always Helen Schumack, Joan Lowy, Friederike Haselbeck. These are really researchers with a lot, and practitioners with a lot of experience. Jane Stanley. So there's many people. Monica Necker-Ribaud-Pierre. These are all people and researchers and clinicians that have worked for decades in the field, and I think it's you cannot see your own research without the history and where it comes from, because what we do currently is possible because other researchers did things before. So there's this saying about standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think this is how really I feel. We're working along a continuum, and so all the music therapists that work before influence a lot how I see music therapy and how I think about research, and hopefully what we do will positively influence the next generations. Would be nice, at least.
Very eloquently said. I think, when I'm teaching research methods to students, I often talk about, finding the gap, right? So we're looking to what supports our study, what has been done that's informing, and then maybe where is the gap? Where do we need to know more?
Yeah, I think that the gap, at least what I found has been in the last, it started about maybe 10 years ago, the idea of moving to family-centered care, but I think we have been able to pioneer some of the bits, a small part of the puzzle, especially working with fathers, with actively integrating parents, and not only thinking about the benefits for the babies, but also thinking how parents and can benefit, and working with outcome measures that have to do with bonding, and how parents and babies can foster their relationship. So I hope this has been a gap that is slowly being filled up.
In Canada, we don't have a lot of music therapists working in the neonatal intensive care unit, unfortunately. What is it like in Colombia? Is that a large population where music therapists work, or?
No, I wouldn't say so. So in Colombia, it's still, so the master's program here, it's just got 10 years old. So it was the 10-year celebration, I think, last year. So it's still a rather new profession. There might be about 140, 150 music therapists in Colombia. And most of them do work in community projects, in educational contexts. And hospitals are still a very new field for music therapists. So I would not say that's a large field, but I think that the medical context in general is experiencing a shift in Colombia towards more openness to music therapy within the medical field. And the programs have been very much welcomed by the staff. And so, yeah, hopefully in the future there will be many more music therapists working in this context.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to also, I mean, to hear about your research, but also to understand, you know, what who music therapists are working with in different parts of the world.
Yeah, totally.
When you conceive your research projects, what motivates you?
It's a good question. I don't know. Well, first of all, I've always liked research. It has always been something that has been interested in. And I think, well, obviously, what we talked before about the gap. So there are gaps in knowledge that we know and that we think it would be worth researching. But then it also depends on each unit, each hospital. For example, we've been planned for doing a study on pain in preterm babies during blood sampling. But then the blood sampling takes place at 5 a.m. in the morning in Colombia. So although we could have done this for research purpose, we always think very strictly about how research can impact clinical practice and what we can learn from research. How can we then implement this knowledge in the daily clinical practice? And would not have been feasible that music therapists are at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning in the unit all the time. So this is a research project, and we did not go further with it because it would have been really hard to implement it. So I think one motivation is obviously the gaps in knowledge, but the second motivation is really how research can be really closely tied to clinical practice and how we can make then this shift, this knowledge transfer from research to clinical practice. I think this is something that's really fascinating for me.
I'm so happy you highlighted that, because I think that is so important, to be able to translate the results of the research into our clinical practice. For me, what motivates me a lot of the time is if something happens in a session or is happening and I want to know more about it. Why is it working, or why isn't it working? And I want to know more so that I can learn and then implement it into my practice.
Yeah, agree.
Great. Could you tell us, how would you explain the purpose and outcomes of research to people who are not music therapists?
Yeah, I think then it depends on the people you try to reach, because I know, for example, medical staff, they like, in general, at least in the hospitals where we work, they like numbers, but they also like emotion. So they really appreciate, for example, a detailed description of a case, or including a video of a clinical session. And so I think there are different ways of communicate what we do and what the benefits are. And I think it depends very much on with whom you're speaking with, because another aspect of our service is always education. So we always try to educate about how patients, families, parents can use music on their own for their benefits during hospitalization, after hospitalization, because I think we music therapists don't own music in healthcare context. It's been a discussion, right? So, but I think music is just such an integral part of humanity that it just would be very strange to have it like tied to one profession. So there are so many, and music is so available with cell phones, iTunes, whatever. So there are so many ways that parents and families and patients can learn about how to use music adequately for their health and for their well-being. And I think if we think about this group of people, of how we can communicate research outcomes, then we are thinking much more about doing, for example, workshops or having leaflets where we, in a very basic language, can explain how patients can use music to alleviate their pain or distract themselves from worries or anxiety, how they can sleep better. There's so many ways. So this is just another way of communicating. We're also thinking about online web page or tutorials where we not teach music therapy, but where we can give at least tips and suggestions for how everyone could use music for their benefits. I think that's important, that music does not, it's not something that's really too, we should not be jealous about it. I put it this way.
I completely agree. I feel that it's so important when we can help teach people how to use music in their own care for health and wellness, especially given that many times we're only seeing a client maybe once a week, right? So teaching them how to use music in the interim.
Yeah.
Something that I'm curious about, that you work with some vulnerable populations, as do many music therapists. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the ethical considerations or challenges?
Yeah. I mean, as you know very much, for example, end-of-life care, palliative care is really a big issue, and where ethics becomes a little bit more obvious. But I think it's just transversal aspect of our profession that everything we do should be grounded in ethics. And I think it has not been a concern for us, but we are very clear, for example, what we can offer and what we cannot offer. I think this is where ethics begin, also to be able to say, for your kind of problems, maybe another healthcare professional would be better for you, or this is something that if you have this goal, I don't believe we could achieve it, but we can work on other aspects. So I think ethics is not only saying what we can do, but also what we cannot do, what we cannot provide. I think that's something important. And in the hospitals, is also something important, because music in general and music therapy, at least in Colombia, it has still somehow a magical connotation. So there will come someone and will do something with me, and it might heal me. So we try to be very clear about what the border is and what the limits are of our profession, what we cannot do. And then there's obviously all the more formal aspects of informed consents in research and going through ethics committees. But it's a lot for us about communication. How can we communicate what people can expect from our service? And I think that's a huge thing. And obviously in the virtual space, it somehow gets more diluted, ethics. I think that's something that might be a concern in the future, because telehealth will continue in one way or another. And I think somehow it might be more difficult, or we need new tools to really be grounded in ethics.
I wonder, given the restrictions, of course, with COVID-19, has COVID-19 impacted your research plans, or even had to change or pivot some of your projects?
Yeah, it definitely did. So here in Colombia, it started in March. So March, April, we still have been working in all three hospitals. But then in May, we had to pause for a month in one of the hospitals. In the second hospital, we started in August again. So we had a 3 month break. And the third hospital is still closed for music therapy. So it has impacted our clinical service. And also the burn study, it started actually in February. We have not been able to recruit the first participant, but then we obviously had to stop it and postpone it. So it has deeply impacted, I think, our clinical service, not only for the worse, somehow also for the better, because we've been learning a lot about, in the US and maybe even in Canada, telehealth has been a big issue for years. In Colombia, it's been very, very new. People are very used to personal contact. And now it has been a shift in the society where virtual sessions and telehealth has been slowly becoming an integral part of daily routine. So accessibility for people to reach a music therapist is something that certainly improved. There are many regions in Colombia where it's very difficult to get to, but maybe they can just connect via Zoom or via telehealth, and they can benefit from a certified music therapist. So that's a positive thing about it. But yeah, and still the long-term outcome, we have to wait and see how everything will go. But yes, it has impacted definitely our work.
I think, in some ways that is the positive. I think that people that were not able to access, given their location, now have the option of potentially participating in telehealth. So that is a positive of COVID. Certainly with my own research, a lot of things had to be put on hold, but it also opened up opportunities for me. And I now have a few international participants that I wouldn't have had if it was not COVID.
True. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing so much information with us today. I wonder if there is anything else you would like to comment upon, or if there's any advice or words of wisdom you'd like to leave our viewers with today.
Well, words of wisdom. It's a good question. I don't know if it's very much wisdom, but at least what also the situation with the COVID and the pandemic has made really clear for me that that we are all transitioning between birth and the end of life, and I think being very much aware of the more subtle aspects of life. I've been the last couple of years very much involved in working, so I've worked a lot, and somehow the pandemic has forced me to take a breath and to pause and to take it slower. So self-care is something I think that has really become more obvious for me, and also as an opportunity. I know there are so many difficult aspects, and there's so many grief and so many pain all over the world, and it's just a crazy time. But I think we are just very young as a human species yet, so we have not. Just yesterday, I've learned that with our species we have 7,500 generations. So we are 7,500 generations old, more or less. And I was thinking about, the 10,000 hours of practicing that we say for an instrument. If you want to master an instrument, you need 10,000 hours of practice, more or less. So I think we still have 2,500 generations left to learn, but we're gone over the half, so we're 3/4 through it. So hopefully the shift and the transitioning that's always painful will result in a better life for so many people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ettenberger. Those are wonderful words of wisdom to leave us with. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and to please stay tuned for the next video in the research series.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.